Okay, thank you so much. Great. It is really a pleasure and an honor for me to be talking to you today. It's my second time speaking about my work and our team and our progress within Restart Ukraine for this audience in Sweden. The last time was last year in Stockholm. And I would be very happy to be presenting something very new and fresh. However, the reality is that the recovery process and the recovery actions in Ukraine are taking certain pace and shaping themselves. So partially my content will repeat the previous one. However, there are new parts and also there are new thoughts and ideas I would like to share with you and to shape this blog, because after me there will be great speakers as well. So I have 18 minutes and I already spent some 3 minutes for the introduction, so I will take it from here. My name is Alexander Shevchenko, and since April 2022, we have united our forces with other colleagues from various backgrounds: architecture, urban planning, social sciences, environmental studies, in looking how do we envision the recovery of Ukrainian medium, small scale cities from a professional perspective, because we saw that there is a certain window of opportunities which is important to use for the good of our Ukrainian settlements. And I would like to share some key ideas of which we reached during this period of 1 year from the start of work, and emphasis on specific needs where we need to look carefully, look more, unite forces, so it is not a number of numerous initiatives going on simultaneously in Ukraine, however, a more orchestrated and consolidated action. And we are very grateful for the external support of Sweden and also other partners. So first of all, we thought that it is now not a process which should be placed in the cabinets of economics, transportation, environment. We need to mix these topics as early as possible. Thus, we created a certain methodology of cluster approach, which you can see on the screen. So 9 clusters represent 9 cross-cutting topics, and it is not a sequence. What do you do first and what do you do the last? However, the main bunch of topics which are critically important to look at during the recovery. So it is not only about building and collecting money, it's about also looking ahead. What challenges do we foresee in the future? How do we build our decisions on the evidence-based ground? How do we bring people back, not only envisioning some kind of great future in 10 years, and so on and so forth. And I will go through a specific pilot. We called it first pilot project. Now I tend to call it case study due to several reasons, which I will also highlight during my speech. So it is the city of Chernihiv, and I will stop on that a little bit later. However, apart from clusters, we also have time, and time is a very tricky resource. There is never enough time, and the recovery and time are non-linear. What I mean by that is that the first few days after the occupation of certain settlements throughout the year in Kharkiv, in Kherson, in Kyiv, in Chernihiv were essential for the recovery of processes important for life. So it's about shelter, it's about water and food. So it's about basically a humanitarian response. However, further from the crisis we go, more less sharp are things. However, different type of action has to be suggested. So we see it in 3 frames of working with time. It is humanitarian response, it is certain adaptation which could happen also during the war, after the war, and it's about strategic development. And all 3 phases, they foresee different type of thinking and different type of urban planning, let's say. What does it mean on the case of, here is the diagram, we, let's say, shape it as emergency response from 0 to 1 year, then 1 to 3, 5 years, it's the adaptation, and then we go really long-term projects which take a lot of resources and a lot of time as well. So Chernihiv, it's a bigger city, to be honest. It's not a medium size or small size, but we were very eager to work with Chernihiv to see what we can do on this wave of the occupation of major Ukrainian cities starting spring 2022. And Chernihiv is a very interesting case where you can see a diversity of various typologies. You can see private housing, you can see multi-story housing. It is very traditional and cultural. It has a history of more than 1,000 years. It is very green in terms of green infrastructure, and it is close to the border of Russia, and it is actually the center of the region, of the oblast. So this shapes a very long list of factors. We are eager to respond, and actually answering these questions shape the type of urban planning action. How do we live close to the border with Russia? How do we recover green zones? So I will drive you through this pilot during the next 10 minutes. And I'll try to bring some conclusions or ideas, because it is not a full project which has a start and end. It is more a sneak peek of how recovery could be happening in Ukraine. And of course, different cities take different approach and methodology. So starting from the beginning, we were very keen to analyze the spatial risk and opportunities, taking into consideration all the aspects which were present in Chernihiv during the war, before the war, and potentially after the war. So this is just a kind of one of the slides we were developing throughout our thinking process, which enabled us to work specifically with the clusters I mentioned at the very beginning. So emergency response, the first steps of response, there's a number of critical steps we think need to be done spatially. So we thought at that moment back 1 year ago, and we still think that debris management and working with the rest of the damage is critically important, and it is important to integrate this process at the very beginning, not at the end, to avoid contamination and to avoid blocking of particular areas which could be used during the first years of the recovery. So in this slide, we identified the key areas through remote sensing which were damaged. We understood what is the composition of the debris, and we suggested a few zones where they could be collected, recycled, and upcycled. And at this moment, I can say that there are a few companies in Ukraine, pretty much international companies, which are already doing that. And this is an existing practice, such companies like Neo Eco and others. So this could be integrated to the longer chain. However, this needs some additional actions and additional coordination and orchestration. Then what we can do various types of objects on the different type of horizon of planning. We can do some tactical urbanism, but we can also use the debris as a component for the future buildings. Next question: how do we bring people back home? It was important for Chernihiv at that stage. Maybe not that important right now, because people figured out their way to go back somewhere, but the newly liberated areas will face totally the same question. So we could actually identify how many square meters were damaged and where we could actually bring those people using various typologies of the temporarily or constant housing, which could be very different from very popular decision solution in Ukraine, which is the container housing. So we believe container is not the only remedy for this challenge. As well, so secondary use, change of function for other infrastructure is totally possible. As you can see in this on your screens, dormitories, old hospitals which are not in use anymore could be reused, and there were also practices from Sweden in the first part of the day. What is important is to figure out what are the important memory and heritage zones from the very beginning and localize them and prevent any type of uncontrolled development there, because this is important for the future. Due to traumatization, it's not possible to talk about it right now. However, we need to preserve it for the future when we will have time and capacity, mental capacity to work with it. So I see I should speed up a little bit. So here are the main findings that we need to understand: collecting data, recycling the debris, working with the return of people back home, and localization of specific important areas is the priority of the local recovery, apart from strategic infrastructure, which is clearly addressed by the ministry, by the agency, of course. But this is something we can do locally and not wait for the kind of impetus from the top, but do it by ourselves. Adaptation, I will try to be here. I will try to be here a little bit more short. What do we do between humanitarian response, basically, and strategic development? How do we change the way we look at things which are going on spatially in the city? So basically, these slides show that we identified the areas where the new housing or change of function could be happening. So we do not develop the city around on this on the outskirts, but we provide some new density and some vibrance to the city, which is a totally game changer for Ukrainian cities. They are used to take a field and to build a multi-story building for 5,000 people. However, they are not used to densify and create the vibrance and multi-use in the center, for instance. Thinking about different scales between the city and the municipality and surrounding area, this is an example how evacuation routes of surrounding cities were actually going through Chernihiv, and blowing down a single bridge was a major risk and major threat for far more people than lived in Chernihiv at that time. So looking at the risk profile basically and assessing everything from the perspective what creates a risk due to any type of hazard is the risk profile or resilience profile, which need to be created in the cities, not only due to the war, possible upcoming war, but also due to the climate change and other factors you all know. Assessing the safety within the city, the coverage of the shelters, basic geospatial analysis could do that. Then also it's a matter of prioritization, where do we start first, where do we do second, and within the limited money framework, it is important to select right priorities in order to activate people, to activate city, but not to just pack it with projects, which is important. So we looked through the accessibility, we looked through the barriers, which were not a risk in the peaceful time. However, during the wartime, they became essential and critical for people not being able to leave the city or to evacuate or get to the drugstore in a short time, especially for the elder people. So this is how we can actually adapt the city from the perspective of this resilience and flexibility to the upcoming challenges, which we do not know. And I would like to emphasize here that it is, I think, an illusion that we will have all time we need for the recovery after the war will end. We will be constantly challenged by other stress factors, and we need to make the recovery very compact, very effective, and very agile. So basically, as a startup, as an I don't know what to compare it to. So I know I'm running out of time, so I go basically through this adaptation phase, which is about the factors you see on the screen. And the last phase is about sustainable development. And there is a lot of discussions, what do we call sustainable development? However, for Ukrainian cities and municipalities, I would like to emphasize that it is important to look at integration of nature to the city. So nature is not a resource. Nature is the context we need to integrate and to switch to the ecosystem services, how not to use of whatever we want in a way we like. So you can see how we used all the possible data available from Strava, from other open source data, which we actually synchronized with the mobility in the city and came up with this green-blue city, which has a very specific structure, spatial structure of how do we need to empower this city spatially. And specific projects and with the specific functions on specific place. Then we go to the other component, which is a multi-purpose city. So we believe that industrial parks is a great idea. However, it doesn't solve the economic vibrance and the innovation and all that type of vibe which comes from Ministry of Digital Transformation. Okay, it's great to have innovation and clusters and stuff, but it has to be somewhere. And we believe it has to be in the cities, and we believe it has to activate the gray zones, which you in Sweden do perfectly. How do we actually do it on the small scale of the neighborhood? And basically, how do we activate communities? Ukrainian cities and municipalities are very centered, and outskirts are empty of services. It is a sleeping district, so activating communities, activating outskirts, identifying communities is the right way to decentralize city, make it more agile, make it more reactive to the possible challenges. And these are a few examples we came up with. To summarize everything, that's what we call the strategic development phase. What didn't work good with Chernihiv was a lack of understanding of the approach. There was a lack of political will because there was a difficult political situation due to the collision between the mayor and the president party. This is true. Thus, a good link with the municipality is a must to introduce such visions. What we do next, we are basically working the same we are basically working the same concept with the other municipality and trying to incorporate our international partners to this meaningful work. And I believe there are some other partners in the audience in Göteborg, which will be talking after me and will build up a bridge to what we are doing now, what we did in Chernihiv, and how do we possibly can cooperate in the future. I'm 3 minutes late. I'm totally sorry. I will stop here and thank you for your attention.